My name is Stella, and I'm 35 years old. 3 years ago, I married the best man I've ever known in a small outdoor ceremony at Gatineau Park, on a Saturday in September when the maple trees along the path were just beginning to turn at the edges. I remember thinking it felt like the beginning of something whole, not just for me, but for my son. Noah was 5 when Joel and I got married. He's 8 now, in grade 3 at a school in Ottawa's West End, and he is the kind of kid who keeps a running list in a notebook of every dog he's ever petted, including the dog's name, breed if he could figure it out, and a score out of 10 that he insists is, and I'm quoting, purely scientific. He calls Joel Dad. He started about 6 months after our wedding. One early morning when he was still half asleep and asking what was for breakfast. Joel didn't make a thing of it. He just said, "Yeah, bud," and got up to make eggs, and that was the whole beginning of everything that mattered. Joel's mother, Dorothy, made her feelings about Noah clear early on. Not loudly. Not in a way that gave me anything solid to point to at first. It was the kind of exclusion that operates below the surface, the kind you gaslight yourself about. Because surely no grandmother would actually be that deliberately cold to a young child. Surely you're misreading it. Surely she just needs more time. There was the Christmas 2 years ago when Noah spent an entire afternoon making a drawing for her. Everyone in the family as stick figures carefully labeled, each person in their own color. And she said, "Oh, isn't that something?" and set it face down on the hall console without a second glance. There was the Thanksgiving when he sat beside her at dinner, and she spoke over his head the entire meal, directing every question and every smile at her daughter's children. The grandchildren she called her real grandchildren, without seeming to notice how easily that phrase landed on an 8-year-old who could hear every word. There were birthday parties, Sunday dinners, the small steady accumulation of moments in which Noah was physically present but not actually counted. I told myself she just needed more time. That these things took adjustment, that people who were set in their ways could still change if you were patient enough. 3 years is a long time to keep telling yourself that. This past December, we drove out to Dorothy and Harold's house in Nepean on Christmas Day. A 40-minute drive through the kind of heavy Ottawa snowfall that turns the Queensway into a slow gray blur and makes you grateful you switched to winter tires in November like a sensible person. Noah slept most of the way, his head tilted against the window, wearing the ugly Christmas sweater he'd picked out himself at Value Village back in November, because it had a large embroidered moose on the front, and he had declared it, and I am still quoting, extremely Canadian and therefore basically mandatory. He had his school bag in his lap. Inside it, wrapped in a single sheet of tissue paper he'd folded and refolded until it was as neat as his 8-year-old hands could manage, was a clay ornament he'd made in art class. It was painted red and green, a little lopsided the way handmade things always are, and across the front he had printed in careful, deliberate block letters, "Our Family 2024. He'd been holding on to it since the first week of December, waiting specifically for Christmas to give it to Dorothy. His plan, he'd told me this seriously, the way he told me most plans, like he was briefing me before a mission, was to ask her to hang it on the tree herself. He mentioned it at least a dozen times on the drive over. Would she put it near the front or on the side? Did she think Dorothy liked clay things or more regular ornaments? Was green a good color for it, or should he have done blue? When we pulled into the driveway, he had his seatbelt off before the car fully stopped. "Do you think she'll put it on right away?" he asked. "I think she'll love it," I said. Joel had driven separately. He'd needed to make a stop on the way to pick something up for Harold, so it was just Noah and me going up the front path. Noah had his bag pressed to his chest. The snow was coming down in thick, even flakes, and he stuck his tongue out to catch one without breaking his stride, the way he always does in winter, like it's something that needs doing. Dorothy and Harold's living room was exactly what you'd expect from people who took the holidays seriously. A proper floor-to-ceiling tree in the corner, strung with white lights, wrapped gifts stacked underneath in neat clusters sorted by family, and above the fireplace, the thing I noticed the moment I walked through the door, a row of personalized red velvet stockings hung on gold hooks along the mantle. Harold's, Dorothy's, Joel's, his sister Kit's. 2 smaller ones at the end for Kit's kids, Daisy and Remy, with their names stitched across the cuffs in white thread. 5 stockings, 5 names. I counted them twice, standing in the entrance hall still in my coat, Noah beside me wrestling with his bootlaces. I counted them and felt something drop quietly inside my chest, the way you feel when something you suspected turns out to be true. Kit was already there, hanging her coat near the armchair. Dorothy was in the kitchen. Harold was standing by the tree straightening a branch. Daisy and Remy were already on the floor with their stockings in their laps, pulling things out, holding them up, making the particular loud, joyful noise of children on Christmas morning. The room was warm and bright and smelled like shortbread. And Noah stood in the entrance hall, boots still half on, looking at the mantle. He didn't say anything right away. He's 8, not 3. He could count. "Mum," he said very quietly, "is mine coming?" Before I could answer, Dorothy came in from the kitchen carrying a tray of shortbread. She glanced at the mantle. She glanced at Noah. And then she looked at me with an expression I can only describe as politely resolved. The look of someone who has thought through a conversation in advance and decided where it is going to land. She said the stockings were for Joel's family, that she'd done it that way for years, that she hoped I understood. I asked her very calmly whether her son's son might be part of Joel's family. She said that Noah wasn't Joel's son in that sense. She said it gently, even, which was somehow worse than being shouted at, because it implied that she genuinely believed she was being reasonable. She said Noah was welcome to stay for dinner, and that she'd always been perfectly civil to him. She said she didn't think it was fair to her other grandchildren to blur the lines. Blur the lines. I looked at Noah. He had the bag pressed to his stomach, and he was looking at the shortbread on Dorothy's tray rather than at her face, and I knew from the particular stillness of his posture that he was working very hard not to cry in front of everyone. The way kids do when they sense that crying would make something worse, but they don't have the tools yet to know what to do instead. I told Dorothy that was not acceptable, that Noah was Joel's son in every way that actually counted, that we would be leaving if this was how things were going to be. Dorothy set the cookie tray down on the coffee table. She said I was being dramatic. She crossed the room and put her hand on Noah's shoulder. Not roughly, but with the casual authority of someone used to directing things. And I heard her tell him in a low voice that she needed his help with something in the other room, or that the coats needed tidying. Some reason that sounded like it was for his benefit when it absolutely was not. And she steered him, gently but unmistakably, back toward the entrance hall, away from the living room, where Daisy and Remy were still pulling foil-wrapped chocolates from their stockings. Noah went with her, because he's 8 and he'd been raised to listen to adults. I covered the distance between us before I'd consciously decided to move. I put myself in the doorway and I said, not quietly, not calmly, but clearly, that my son was not going to stand in the entrance hall while her other grandchildren opened stockings 20 feet away. That he had come here today with a gift he had made with his own hands and spent weeks looking forward to giving her. That he was going to be treated as part of this family, or we were going to leave. Dorothy straightened. She said, in front of Harold, who had gone very still by the tree, and in front of Kit, who had stopped moving entirely in the armchair, and in front of Daisy and Remy, who had put their stockings down and were watching. She said that she had the right to determine how her home was run, that she cared about her son, that she understood I was part of his life, but that Noah was not her grandchild, and she was not going to pretend that he was simply because it made me more comfortable. Harold cleared his throat. That was all he did. The front door opened. Joel came in from outside with snow on his jacket and a bag in each hand, and the expression of someone who was expecting a normal Christmas morning. He stopped 2 steps into the entrance hall and looked at what was in front of him. His mother standing with her shoulders back, his wife standing with her jaw set, and his son standing near the coat hooks, still holding the school bag, except now he'd taken the ornament out and was holding it against his chest, in both hands, the tissue paper slightly crumpled. Joel looked at the ornament. He looked at Noah's face. He looked at his mother. His face changed. I've been with this man for 4 years, and I've seen him in most of the states a person can be in. Happy, frustrated, tired, quietly moved by things, the way he gets at the end of a hard week, or when he watches Noah finally land something he's been working at. But I had never seen him look the way he looked in that doorway, like something had broken open in him that was not going to seal back up. He set both bags down on the floor without taking his eyes off Noah. He crossed the entrance hall and crouched down in front of his son, right there at the foot of the stairs, and held out one hand. Noah looked at him for a moment and then placed the ornament in it. Joel held it for a long time. The lopsided clay oval, the careful paint, the block lettered "Our Family 2024. He pressed his thumb very gently along one edge, smoothing a small chip in the clay that must have happened somewhere on the drive over. Then he stood up. He walked into the living room and hung the ornament himself on the front of the tree, near eye level, where the string lights behind it made the red and green paint catch slightly. Not tucked toward the back. Right in the center of the front, where you'd see it when you walked in the room. He turned around and faced everyone. Harold by the tree, Dorothy in the doorway, Kit in the armchair, Daisy and Remy on the floor, me and Noah in the hall. Joel said he needed everyone to listen, because he was going to say this once. He said that Noah was his son, not in a technical sense, not in a stepson asterisk sense, not with any qualifier attached. His son. He said he had been Noah's father every morning for 3 years, making his lunch, going to his school concerts, sitting in arenas cold enough to see your breath, to watch him play hockey on Saturday mornings, reading the same chapters of the same book every night at bedtime, because Noah liked the routine of it. He said being a parent was not a document you received at a hospital. It was 1,000 ordinary decisions to show up every single day until your life no longer made any sense without that person in it. He looked at his mother. He said that a grandmother who believed her grandson should stand in a hallway while other children opened gifts had confused blood with love somewhere along the way and lost sight of which one actually mattered. He said he understood it was her house. He wasn't raising his voice. But he told her clearly and without any space for renegotiation. If she could not treat Noah as her grandchild with the same welcome, the same warmth, the same stocking on that mantle, then she would not be seeing any of them. Not this Christmas, not Easter, not any Sunday dinner until that changed, and changed in a way that was real. Dorothy opened her mouth. Joel raised one hand, not aggressively, just the gesture of a person who is not finished, and she stopped. He turned to his father. His voice shifted here, the way it does when something is older and heavier than the immediate moment. He told Harold that he had spent years watching him sit quietly in the same room, while decisions like this one got made. That staying quiet was not the same as staying neutral. That looking away from something was a choice just as much as looking directly at it. He said he loved his father. He said he was tired of waiting for him to figure that out on his own. He said today was the day. Harold's face was dark red. Not with anger, but with the specific shade of shame that comes from hearing something you already knew, said out loud to an audience. He said, barely audible, that he hadn't realized it had gotten this bad. Joel looked at him for a long moment. He said, "You knew." The room held that. Kit stood up from the armchair. She walked across to the entrance hall and crouched down in front of Noah and said, "Hey, do you want to come sit with Daisy and Remy? Remy got a Lego Technic set, and he refuses to read the instructions on principle, so someone responsible needs to be there." Noah looked up at me. I nodded. He went. Remy slid over on the carpet immediately, holding out the box. Daisy, who at 9 considered herself senior management on all matters Lego-related, pointed to the piece Remy was already holding upside down. Within about 45 seconds, all 3 of them were deep in a disagreement about whether you sort pieces by color or by size before you start building, which is apparently a topic with very strong and sincerely held opinions on multiple sides. I watched my son's shoulders drop, that particular release when a child stops holding themselves ready for something, and I felt it in my own chest like an exhale I'd been carrying without knowing it for 3 years. Dorothy had not moved from the kitchen doorway. She was looking at the tree, at the ornament on the front branch, at Our Family 2024 in its red and green paint catching the light. Something had shifted in her face. Not warmth, not quite, but not the flat certainty of before either. Some fixed belief she'd been carrying had run up against a wall it could not get around and was figuring out what to do next. She didn't apologize that afternoon. I hadn't expected her to. People who have spent decades organizing the world according to their own rules don't undo those rules in a single morning over shortbread and stockings. What changes first is not the apology, but the silence where the certainty used to be. That has to come first. What surprised me was Harold. Sometime in the middle of the afternoon, while Joel and Kit were in the kitchen, and Daisy and Remy had pulled Noah out into the backyard to attempt a snow fort. I could hear the 3 of them through the glass door, Noah's laugh loud enough to carry. Harold came and sat beside me on the couch. He had a cup of tea. He looked like a man who had prepared something to say and then lost the thread of it somewhere. He said, "I should have done better by that boy." I said yes. He said, "I don't know how to fix something like this." I said, "You start by not making it worse." He nodded at his tea for a while. Then he asked me, a bit gruffly, what Noah's favorite hockey team was. He said he had a connection who occasionally came through with tickets for the Canadian Tire Center, and that if Noah was a Senators fan, he might be able to arrange something in the new year. I told him Noah was an Ottawa Senators fan for reasons that defied any rational analysis given their current standing, and Harold made a sound that was almost a laugh and said that sounded about right for his side of the family. It wasn't enough. Not for 3 years of not enough. But it was different from the 4 hours before, in a way that mattered. Before we left, while Noah was in the entrance hall doing his boots, Joel went back to the tree. He touched the ornament once, lightly, with 2 fingers, just checking that it was still there, still exactly where he'd placed it. Noah noticed, because Noah notices everything. He looked up from his laces and said, "Do you think she'll keep it after we go home?" Joel looked at the ornament. He looked at Noah. He said, "Family rule, everything stays on the tree until after New Year's. She didn't make that rule, so she has to follow it." Noah considered this with the gravity he brings to matters of fairness and said, "That's actually a really solid loophole." Joel laughed, a real one from somewhere that had unclenched. We drove home through the same snow that had been falling all day, heavier now, the kind of Ottawa December dark that settles in by 4:30 and blurs the streetlights into pale hollows and makes the whole city feel quieter than it is. Noah was asleep before we reached Carling, his head against the window, still wearing the moose sweater. Joel drove with one hand on the wheel, and somewhere on the long stretch of the Queensway, he reached over and took my hand on the console between us. Neither of us said anything. We didn't need to. Some things take years to say out loud, and then they take only a moment, and the moment rearranges everything it touches. Dorothy may not be changed overnight. Harold may take longer than he thinks to become the person he said sorry for not being. None of that is resolved cleanly. But what was said in that living room was said in front of everyone who needed to hear it, and that doesn't go back into silence. The next morning, Noah came downstairs before either of us, and I found him standing in the kitchen in his socks, looking at the small corkboard on the wall where we kept drawings and photos and the odd magnet from places we'd been. He had a piece of paper and a marker. He drew a new picture, fast and loose, the way he draws when he's not being careful, of 3 people in a house with a Christmas tree. One tall, one medium, one small. He wrote their names underneath the way he'd labeled everything. He stuck it to the corkboard with the blue fish magnet from the Rideau Valley trip we took in August. Then he went to find Joel, because Joel had promised there'd be pancakes, and he was holding him to it. That's all it is, in the end. It's the corkboard in the kitchen. It's the names written underneath. It's the ordinary Tuesday morning, and the one after that, and everyone after that, chosen again and again without an audience or a speech or anyone needing to see it. The stocking on the mantle is just fabric and thread. What goes into the stocking is what a person decides to put there. Joel made the decision 3 years ago, and he has made it every day since. He just finally said it out loud in a room full of people who needed to hear it. And my son slept all the way home with his head against the window, and when he woke up in his own bed the next morning, he came looking for his dad. Not because he had to. Because that's where he knew to look.